right now. I'm super, super excited. I'm literally fangirling at home right now because we have the amazing Charlie. How Charlie? How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good at home, safe. And this is
Same.
today's Friday. So first of all, happy Friday. It's not Monday like the whole week. It's finally Friday. So as we talked, we are doing these Friday Twitch streams where we talk with mostly women from the tech industry about their experiences and how they started. So first of all, thank you for having us. And my first question is, how did you start in this? How did you get coding?
So I don't have a CS degree. I studied marketing, so I have a master's in communication and advertising. And I started my career in advertising agencies. So I was more on the project manager side. And I was actually working with developers, so I was kind of like telling them what to do and what the client wanted. But there's a moment where I got more excited about what they were doing than my own job. So I started to look into how I could maybe learn these skills as well. So I kind of looked into the different options. There was going back to uni or trying to learn at home or doing a boot camp. I tried to learn at home at first, but the thing is, when you're doing something totally different, you don't know what you don't know. So I knew a little bit of HTML, but at the time, I didn't even know how to add JavaScript to my site. I even remember it. I was like, where do I copy this bit of code? So learning at home wasn't really an option. And then going back to uni wasn't really one as well because I was in Australia at the time, and as it's really expensive to be an international student in Australia, so that was not really an option either. I didn't really have the money to do that, and this is where I came across the coding boot camps. It was about 6 years ago now, and at the time it wasn't really trendy. I think it was a new thing, and companies didn't really trust that you could become a dev without a CS degree. But boot camps, they're kind of short. Like the one that I did was General Assembly, so it was only 12 weeks. And I was thinking, well, if it doesn't work out, I still have my degree. I can still do the job of project manager, but I need to give it a chance, right? Because if it does work, then I can totally change career and start being a dev. And it did work, and I loved it. And yeah, I haven't looked back since. I do not plan on being a project manager again. The skills that I learned are still very useful. I think that even as a dev, communication skills and planning skills are very important, and I think it helps me to do my job now. But I definitely love being a dev. So sometimes I wish that I had thought about doing a CS degree, but it never crossed my mind until I saw these boot camps. And now I'm really happy to see that a lot more people are doing boot camps. It's a lot more accepted, in companies. So yeah, this is how I started.
Cool. It's great how you switched from marketing to coding. And actually, yesterday, the whole team here, we were talking about um, what do you do when you finish a boot camp? Because most of our core members of this organization went to boot camps. So, what did you do when you finished it? Like, how did you land your first job in tech?
So I think one of the lucky thing as well about the fact that I was a project manager as well is that I knew the agency environment, and I knew that I wanted to try something different. So it means that when I finished my bootcamp, I kind of knew that I didn't want to apply for agencies because I knew how they worked and I wanted to try something different. So I started focusing on okay, so there's the other options would be a product company or a consultancy. And in Sydney, there's not that many big products. I mean, there's only kind of like Atlassian and Google, and that's it. Otherwise, it's like other types of companies like banks, but I didn't really want to work for a bank. So I applied for a few different companies because I wanted to see what the interview process was like. So the kind of questions that they would ask. So I did interview with some companies I was not that interested in, just because I wanted to check what they would ask. So it meant that if I didn't go so well in a company that I didn't really want to go for, it wouldn't really hurt me so much, but I would prepare for something that I was more interested in. And so the one that I really went for was the one that I got as my first job. It's a consultancy called ThoughtWorks. And I went for them because when I kind of looked for people who were hiring at the time, I really wanted to find a team of passionate people. I wanted people to mentor me, and I also wanted to be able to work on a lot of different projects. And that's what a consultancy gives you the opportunity to do. It's instead of only working on one product at a time, you do these kind of like mid-term projects. So the consultancy has different clients. So it means that in Sydney, I was working for ThoughtWorks, but every 6 months I would go and help one of the Australian banks, or then I would go and help a startup, and then I would go in like the health care system or whatever, like, or government. And it allowed me to have an idea of different industries, but without actually being stuck in these companies. So I was able to like contribute and observe how they work, but still be part of the consultancy. And they really care about mentoring people. So I grew a lot there. And I think as I didn't know at the time what I wanted to specialize in, I didn't really know that I knew I liked front end, but I also liked back end. And I'm not very good at choosing. So I liked having, like, being able to do it all. Like, that's the thing. I want to do it all, and that's not a thing that's always good. But at the time, being in a consultancy as a full stack dev, people don't really talk about full stack dev anymore. But it was a role at the time. So I was able to do a bit of back end and a bit of front end. And in a consultancy, sometimes you are thrown into projects with a technology that you don't know. So you get used very quickly to learn how to contribute without having to be an expert. You learn really fast because you have to, and you learn enough to do the job and to train your clients, but you can decide what you want to dive into or not. So I think mainly because I wanted to be able to be a full stack dev, I tried to like pick a job that would let me do that. And then throughout my career, then I kind of went more for the front end dev.
Totally. Great. And when you were preparing to land that job, did you work on stuff like how did you presented yourself there? Did you like send your resume and wait, or like did you start doing projects and like getting more into social media at that time? How was it?
I wasn't really into social media at the time. I mean, I've had a Twitter account for like probably more than 10 years now. I feel old, but yeah, it's like, I've had it for a while. But I wasn't posting as much because I wasn't building as much, so I didn't feel like I could share. But I remember that I applied through the website, and interviewing can take a while. So while I was waiting for them to respond, I was building some side projects. I started getting into hardware at that time because as I had a bit of savings, I had the privilege to have a bit of savings, so I wasn't rushing to get a job straight away. I wasn't like, oh my God, I need to pay my rent, so I need to get a job now. So I was lucky in that sense. So I only focused on that particular interview after I interviewed with a few agencies just to see how it was. So I kind of like cut all of the other interviews because interviewing is like a full-time job. It just really takes
totally. It's super stressful. And
so yes.
And So that was your first job, and normally, like, when do you think it's a moment to change in your career? Like, you were there, and then finally you switched.
Mhm.
Like, what was the thing that triggered you to switch? And like, what is your trigger right now to switch to a different startup company or challenge?
So the first time that I think it's when I feel like I'm not learning anymore. Sometimes I don't really know where I want to go in my career. You know, I might not have a clear view of what I want to do in 5 years or something, but I know that I love learning, and that's why I can feel when I'm kind of like doing the same thing over and over again. I think that was one of the issue in being a consultant, is that I was when you're good at what you do, people want you to do the same thing, and they're not trying to push you to do more challenging stuff. But so there was like a bit of a misalignment between what I wanted. It's like I wanted to try something new, and I wanted to learn new technologies. But as I had experience in a certain field or with certain types of companies, I kept being put on the same types of projects. And there's a moment where you ask to change and you ask to be more challenged, but if it's never actually, if it doesn't happen, then I get a bit frustrated. And for me, it's time to go. I don't think that asking to be challenged or to learn something is asking for the world. You know, I never asked for $1 million.
Yet.
But yeah, if I'm just asking to learn and I can't get that, then I don't see the point of staying somewhere. It's like when you have a job, you're giving a lot of your energy and a lot of your time, and asking in exchange to be able to grow it should be normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's about finding how to identify that will help you to make sure that whatever you do in your career is going to serve your next step. Mm-hmm. I'm still learning how to do that, because sometimes it's like you also don't want to leave too early. So this is like this balance of like, when do I realize that I've waited too long, and when do I need to still give it a shot?
Mm-hmm. Yes, great. And in terms of being motivated, what are the things that you do? Like, you have these cool projects that I'm waiting to get there, but what do you do to keep yourself motivated? Because eventually, like, coding gets, like, you eventually start doing the same things.
Yeah.
And like, how do you move from that position and feel a spark inside again?
I think maybe this is why I do so many side projects, because maybe at some point front-end development feels like the same, but I still want to learn and grow. So I move that challenging side that I like to side projects. But I feel like lately I might want to, after a few years of being a dev, I might want to learn about not only coding, but more of like leadership skills, or also how to be more involved into architectural decisions. So it's not really about learning how to implement something, it's about learning how to implement the right thing, or refactoring a bigger thing in the code base than just adding a component. So there's always things that you don't know, and I'm trying to find that. So even at the moment, what would be on my list of things to learn is performance. Like, I don't really know how to use the performance tab in the Chrome DevTools, but there's a lot to learn there. And especially, like, when you look at the average performance of websites, it's not great. And I think that learning how to make web pages faster and lighter would just, like, it's a great skill to have that I don't think many people have the opportunity to work on. Mm-hmm. And I feel like at the moment at Netlify, it's like on my list of things that I want to learn. So now that, you know, I know how to implement a component, I also want to make sure that I learn about that part. And I think because I'm part of a smaller team than I used to be in other companies, I have this opportunity to be more involved into the decisions rather than just the implementation.
Okay, so you mentioned it. So you're currently there in Netlify. That it's like this big, amazing place where they're like full of unicorns in their dev teams. How is it? Like, how is your day to day there? And tell me about, I don't know, like the team and things that you do.
So Netlify is actually not that big. I think we've only just reached 100 people, maybe like a few.
I thought it was
So
bigger.
Yeah.
Marketing's doing everything well there.
Yeah, and the core front end team is actually 6 people. So it's not that many. There's a lot of work to do, so that's what is exciting as well. You're not bored, that's for sure. But day to day, so we're mostly remote, and at the moment, basically everybody's remote because nobody can go to an office, so we're all remote. And 50% of the front end team is in Europe, and the other 50 is in the US. So we have some meetings per day, to kind of have like a check with everybody, or to see, how, to kind of like collaborate on design or on front end architecture meetings and stuff like that. But otherwise, I would say it's pretty standard to how product companies work. We use GitHub to track our issues, and you know what you're working on. We are spread between 3 different what we call pods that are kind of like areas of work. So yeah, it's like there's 2 people per pods, and we kind of know the next features that we want to ship. And yes, we just work on issues. I think it's a pretty common workflow. I don't think we're doing anything really different.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but you're comfortable there, so cool. Okay, so we talked about like your first steps. We talked on like your day to day right now. So I don't want to talk like how do you see yourself in the future. I want to talk more about the stuff that you do that you're passionate about, and I think it's basically like human computer interaction. How did you start it with that? I'm super curious. Like, what was the thing that you said, yeah, I want to do this?
I think it started because when I finished my bootcamp and I was waiting to go do the interviews at ThoughtWorks, I had my first experience with hardware. I didn't build my own thing, but I was using the Sphero robotic ball. It's like a little robot that rolls. And at the time, you could only interact with it with an app on your phone. So you had your phone and you launched the app and you could make it roll around. But I also had a Leap Motion device that tracks the hand movements. And the first thing that I did is, so I knew that you could track the hand movements over the Leap Motion in JavaScript. So you could create visualizations in the browser. When you move your hand over the device, you would see things on the page. But then I also saw that you had a JavaScript library for the Sphero as well. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I can make the ball roll with my hand movements over the Leap Motion. And this was my first experiment in human-computer interaction, because all of a sudden I didn't use the Sphero the way it was like told to use. Like I was like, I don't want to download an app. Like I never really use apps, but I got to build like my own little experiment and just like swipe the hand above the Leap Motion and have the ball roll. And I went from there, because then I started thinking, well, what kind of other device can I use? Like there's not only the Leap Motion, what is there? And then I bought like an armband that was sensing the signals that you like, muscle signals in your arm, so that when you move your arm in a certain way or you do certain gestures, you can also apply that to the ball. And I started from there, and then I actually got into Arduino and Raspberry Pi and building my own little devices and stuff, because then I didn't have to wait for a product to be available on the market. I could buy sensors that were already there, kind of like little modules, and attach it to a board and build my own kind of stuff. So it's always just side projects. I never really used that at work, but I find that super interesting because it means that tech doesn't have to be just on your laptop or on your phone. It can be a lot more than that. And I wish that it was more common to kind of like have different ways to interact with stuff, but that's not the case.
I guess I think like eventually we're going to get there, but I'm not sure like how are we going to implement that? Like, are we going to pay with our faces? Or
well, you can try.
Yes. I know that we are making progress on that, but I'm not sure like how are we going to actually make this useful, like in a way that it's not going to feel weird, like paying with your face or something like that.
Well, I think the issue with paying with your face is more the privacy. Is that I don't want people to have like my data about my face everywhere. But people think it's weird to pay with your face, but so many people unlock their phone with their face. So Apple already has data about your face anyway. And if you go to an airport, a lot of airports now have like face recognition. Like you actually don't really see a person anymore with your passport. You just scan your face. So you're doomed anyway. So
it's already there. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you started with that, and then I saw that conference where you were showing the Street Fighter thing, and you were so happy because it worked on the first time, and I was like, yeah, it worked. So
it's rare. So
I would like for you to like explain us how do you do that. Like I know there are 4 steps because I saw the conference and like I have my notes, but like we have people here that didn't see that conference. It was the JS Hawaii, so if you're interested after this, please go and see it. But basically, she did a motion sensor and played Street Fighter, fangirling. So how do you do that? Explain us. How you started and like those 4 steps.
So you have to try to apply the same stuff that you do in normal engineering, but to kind of like a different thing. Because the idea that I had at first was it was just a question like, can I play Street Fighter, but not with my laptop? Like, can I know that you can have sensors with Arduino that track movements, and I know that it gives you data, and I know a bit of machine learning, so can I merge it all together? Can I use the data from an Arduino and then train a machine learning model to recognize the gestures that I'm doing, and then apply that to a Street Fighter game online? So you start with like these 3 different components, building a Street Fighter game in JavaScript. It would use the same skills that you use when you build a website. You might animate a sprite. You might have you trigger actions like a punch or something like that. But then the 2 other parts of the Arduino and the machine learning, you can actually start with them separately. So to get data from gestures, so you need a board that is going to run a program. But the board itself doesn't have any sensors. It just runs the program. So what you have to add is, well, what kind of sensor can I use if I want to get motion data? So you can buy accelerometers, you can buy gyroscopes, or you can buy a sensor that has both in them. And in machine learning, the more data you have, the better. So if you buy an accelerometer just by itself, you're going to get acceleration data, so how fast you're going in 3 axes, so X, Y, and Z. But if you buy it with a gyroscope included as well, you're going to get not only acceleration, but also rotation. So not only how fast you're moving in an axis, but also how you're rotating. So it will give you 6 points of data as you're moving, which is like better. Like if there was more, it would be even better. But at the moment, that's what I have. And then so you hook that up with the Arduino, and then you can use the JavaScript framework called Netlify that allows you to interact with the hardware in Node.js. And yeah, because I do everything in JavaScript. I can't be bothered to learn something else. So I mean, I could, but it would take me more time. And once you get all the data from the Arduino and from the sensor, you can save that in files. And then so you have all this data. So you have to record it many times, because if you only do the gesture once, it's not going to be enough for a machine learning algorithm to recognize what a punch is. It needs more than that. It's not as smart as the brain. It's still just a program, so it needs a lot of data. So once you have the Arduino saving, or the JavaScript, the Node.js code saving data from the Arduino, then you can move on to trying to build a machine learning model with TensorFlow.js that will get all of these data from your gestures and try to find patterns of what makes a punch different from an uppercut and things like that. So that takes a bit more time because it's not as... there's a lot of different parameters that you might have just to tweak, and sometimes you don't know why one works better than the other, or maybe there's a way to know and I just don't know enough. But this is where I'm fine with making it work. And if I want to dive deeper, I do it. But if it works and I'm happy with it, I just move on. I don't know if it's the best way to do it, but
I think that's actually like a great message, because sometimes you don't like start doing something, or basically you don't publish it because you're not like 100% secure that you know everything. And like this is a great example because you made it work, you learned a ton doing it, but you didn't actually like go super deep dived in TensorFlow or whatever it is. So this
I think
is like,
that's why most of the time when I work on something on the side, I'm trying more to validate a concept. I just want to answer the question, can I do it? And when I can, sometimes I dive a bit deeper if I want to, but it's more, I'm not an expert in Arduino, I'm not an expert in TensorFlow.js, but I can only learn if I build something. I mean, that's the way I learn. I don't really learn if I just watch a video and don't code. That's not how I learn. So I build a thing, and then, but I know that I will stick to it until I make it work a little bit. And then I don't need it to be perfect. The code that I write, on side projects, I don't really care. It's not tested. It's not refactored. I just want to learn the basics of a certain library and see if I'm more interested to dive into it. So after I built some projects with TensorFlow.js, I realized that, it's not as scary as I thought it was. And then as I understood more how it worked, then I have other ideas, being like, if I did that with that data, then maybe I can do something with another type of data from another source. It doesn't have to be hardware and an accelerometer. It can be another sensor, or it can be sound data, or a lot of stuff. So it allows me to be less scared about something, and then move on. But I can dive. I've been diving deeper into TensorFlow.js because I want to understand it better, but I don't have to. I could stop right now and move on. I am not like, that's why I'm excited when it works on stage, because I'm like, I know that there's many reasons why it wouldn't work, but I'm like, it worked, that's fine. And there's times where I really struggled, and there's times where on stage it doesn't work the way I want to, but I also want people to understand that. I think pretending that whatever you write always works is just, it's not real.
Yes, I think this is like a great message, because we sometimes think that if we publish or if we show something, eventually we're going to be judged on how it works or how we did it and how it's coded, and it's like, fuck it, it works, it does what it's supposed to do, and you learned a lot. So yeah, great.
You might be judged, but like, also, people, yeah. We could talk a lot about people, but a lot of the times, like, I also get people telling me like, oh, what you do is stupid, or why do you even do this? But I make sure that I build something that I'm really excited about, so that if people don't like it, I'm still excited about it. I didn't build it to post it. I built it because I wanted to answer a question I had. And then when I'm excited, I post it because I'm excited. And I'm like, hey, if you want to try it out, it's there. But I can't stop people from hating it if they want to. And people will judge. But a lot of the times people judge when they haven't even tried. So it's like, you can't even judge really. And if people decide to judge your code instead of helping you making it better, then I don't want to give them any of my time. You'll have a lot more people who will be supportive than people who will shit on you. So, yeah.
Yes.
I know it's hard because I also feel, I don't always feel confident sharing what I share, because I also have that feeling of like, somebody's gonna shit on my dreams and like telling me that, you know, I shouldn't do this. But then I'm like, I'm really excited about the thing that I just did. So, you know, it's like a constant battle with myself.
Yeah.
But in the end, I'm happy I did it because, yeah, I can't stop people who are gonna hate it. But I found that a lot more people were excited, or, you know, I also get inspired a lot by other people doing things, and I want them to also share, because then when I see something that somebody else shared, then that gives me another idea. And if they had never shared that, then I don't get ideas neither. So I really would like to see more people experimenting and not being scared, but I know that it's easy to say because I struggle with it as well.
And this, like, how do you think these ideas? Like, how do you thought about Street Fighter, or how do you thought about the QWERTY keyboard that you control with your brain and stuff like that? Like, what is the thing that pops into your head when you do that? Like, or how do you get those ideas?
I don't always remember, but I think that I think for the Street Fighter, it's because, so I know I wanted to learn about machine learning because when I first started experimenting with the brain sensor, it was giving me, there's only certain events that you get, but I wanted to do something with the raw data. I wanted to train my own thoughts. But I was thinking, okay, to do that, I need to learn machine learning to know what to do with the data. But then I was thinking, well, if I want to learn machine learning, I don't want to do some financial predictions or whatever. You can find blog posts like that. And I know that this is not how I am interested. So I was like, okay, if I want to learn machine learning, I have to do it my way. I have to find something I'm excited about. So I was like, okay, for machine learning, you need data. What gives you data? Well, okay, Arduinos and sensors, they give you data. So now, and then I looked into that, like, okay, so what sensors do I have with me at the moment? And this is where I was like, okay, so accelerometer and gyroscope, so it's movement. And then it's like, okay, what can you do with movement and the browser? And it's like trying to connect ideas together. But at first it was just because I wanted to learn more about machine learning to help me on another project. And I just try to find ways that work for me. So I also followed starter tutorials for TensorFlow.js, but it just didn't give me exactly what I wanted. So I know that if somebody had told me the only way you can learn TensorFlow.js is by looking at financial data and predict the next crash or whatever, I'd be like, I don't think I want to look into it. That's just not what I find interesting. But for the brain sensor and the keyboard, it was because I also want to find ways, like I also want to learn more about accessibility, and I wanted to find ways to bring these innovative technologies, but to more people. And because, like maybe I can type or I can swipe, but it's not the case for everybody. And that kind of device that allows you to do something with your thoughts, it's like most people, have thoughts, and you can use that to then have interaction. So it means that you could allow people to interact with a website that maybe they could never interact with before. But it's all prototypes most of the time. I wish that it was something that was more out there, but you start somewhere, right?
Is there anything right now that Like, do you have ideas right now that you want to work on? Or is there anything, like any particular thing that you say, like, if I had all the time in the world, I would definitely start working on this?
Oh, well, you have a lot of ideas, but I never have all the time in the world. There's a thing that's been on my, there's a lot of things that have been on my list for a few years, but one of them that I'm slowly bumping up on my list is to work on what is called, like, to be able to detect internal speech.
Yes, I saw that thing. Yes, that recognized what basically you're thinking. Amazing.
Because it's like when you talk to yourself in your head, but you don't vocalize it, your jaw still has some signals. You can still track the signals of like very like micro vibrations because you are still moving your jaw, but you're not actually vocalizing the thing. So I have electrodes, and I'm just looking at the particular positions because the people have released papers about how they did that. The thing is, I want to do it with like material that you find online and in JavaScript. So that's like my constraints. But it's that as well. If I get the right positions and I get the data, I could use the same kind of code that I used for the Street Fighter, but to do that instead. I would still get data from Arduino. I would still train a machine learning model, but instead of recognizing movements, I would try to train it some words. I would try to train maybe like hello or please or thank you and start from there. But yeah, I think I haven't started yet because I have this thing of like, I don't know if it's possible. And sometimes I'm like, sometimes I even stop myself from trying because I'm like, I'm going to hit a wall like so bad. And maybe I don't want to hit that wall. So I'm not even starting. But I really want to figure it out. So it's like, it's coming to the top of my list of things that I want to try.
And how is your imposter syndrome?
Still there.
Still there, of course. But how do you manage that? Like, I mean, when you go up on stage and you show everything, like all these magical things that you've been working on, do you feel it? And like, how do you manage that?
I think that's probably why I make sure that I always build something I'm excited about, because then you can't fake what you're excited about. So, it's when you're not sure, like imposter syndrome, I mean, if you're not really sure that you should be there or that you have the skills or whatever, you are sure that you're excited about something. So I use that, and I also try to, it's like when you're on stage, people have accepted your talk, so they want you there. And I also, I prepare a lot for my talk, and I know that the demo that I built it. So there's nothing to, I'm not faking that neither. But I'm always stressed because it's like, maybe people just want to learn about React. Like, what am I doing here? But then I'm like, well, I'm here, and I'm excited to learn. If people don't like my talk, then I'll get to learn about other talks anyway. But otherwise, I think quite a few people do that, is that I keep a spreadsheet of what I would call achievements for myself. Because, it's really easy to forget how much you've done over the years, or even from one week to another. So maybe it sounds nerdy, but I know how I am. And I know that very often I'd be like, I'm not doing enough, or I'm not doing good enough, or whatever. And to avoid, every time I think like that, I kind of like look back and I'm like, well, no, actually, I did a lot of things out of my comfort zone this week, or, this thing, I didn't think I could do it, but I did it. And it's like you have the proof that you wrote down. Like, you can't pretend that it didn't happen. You can't forget about it because it's there. And also, then you can use that if you want a promotion or whatever. But you can track how far you've gone. And it's not, I don't only keep that on for a work thing, but I also keep that just as a life thing in general. It's like, I just keep track of what I do outside of my comfort zone. And then every time my comfort zone is like pushed a little bit, and that's how at the moment it works for me. When I feel down and I feel like everybody's so much better than me, then I can look back and I'm like, well, actually, you know, what I've done compared to who I was last week or whatever is like I've done these things. But I still have it's I don't think it's gonna go away feeling like, you know, I'm not smart enough or whatever. But I've gotten more comfortable with it. I think I'm trying to use it to learn, to motivate myself to learn more. It's like, oh, well, maybe I don't know that and everybody else does, but now it gives me something to try to learn.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's actually like great advice. Like, have a list and push your stuff there. I wrote that down.
It's gonna feel weird at first, but try it for a little bit. Maybe it doesn't work for everybody, but it worked for me, so I still do it.
Yeah. Just like give it a try. I'm going to do that. Do you feel that, like we know that in the tech industry, there's like a huge gap between men and women. Do you feel that sometimes you might feel a bit more like that imposter syndrome thing comes more because of that? Do you feel that that is something that puts more pressure and things to you?
I think less now, because now, you know, I in a senior position, like I feel like I've had 6 years to kind of get comfortable with things, and I mean comfortable. I just mean that I feel like I trust myself more, so I don't feel like I have to really prove myself to everybody. But it's still there because some people make you feel that way, and they want to make you feel that way. I think that things have gotten better over the years. There's still a lot of work to do. But I think that there's sometimes the imposter syndrome comes from the fact that in general, men are more confident, so they will look like they know more. And it's hard to remember that, you know, maybe you have the same knowledge, but you're not as confident about it. So I think it's a thing that, you know, I wish I could borrow some of that confidence sometimes. But yeah, I think it has to that impact of, if people just feel more comfortable about their skills, you will think that you're less good, but you probably actually are the same, but you don't portray yourself the same way. But I think with experience in general, that feeling is still there, but it's a bit more tame. It's not as strong, for me at least. It's not as strong as it used to be. I think that I've done enough to prove that even from the beginning, you shouldn't have to prove that you're a dev. Like, if you work as a dev, you're a dev, and if you're here, you have the skills. People would not hire you if they didn't want to. So yeah, I don't.
Yes, it's there, and we're working on it. Okay, I want to like switch topics and have like something totally different, and then get back. So, the question is, which of these languages? One of them dies. One of them you throw the thing. I don't know how to say it in English, and the other one you're going to marry. So you have Rust, you have Golang, and here it says JavaScript, but it's basically too obvious. So I'm going to say C++. So which of those? Which one dies? Which one survives? And which one you marry?
You said C++, Go, and
Rust.
But I only have experience in C++. That's not fair. So I think Rust is gonna become more and more important, especially with the whole WebAssembly. So I'm gonna marry Rust.
Oh.
What are you gonna think about the future?
That one's going to get me more money, so I'm marrying that one.
Yeah, it's like the potential. C++, it's been there for a while. I still think it's important, but I might kill C++. And then, the last one is Go. I have no experience with Go, but
Okay.
I think Rust is more promising, so I would marry Rust.
This is being recorded, so everyone in the C++ community is coming for you.
Now I have to look into Rust. Okay.
So, like looking to the future, what do you think like are the technologies that we should be learning or betting on that they're going to grow and explode eventually?
I would want to say WebAssembly, but I think it's still quite early on. But I think that the potential for what can be done in the browser is going to be pretty cool. From the examples that I saw so far, it seems really, really powerful. Like you can bring some C++ stuff like into the browser. So that's
dead right now.
Huh? Yeah,
it's going
that's right. Who needs C++? I'm gonna have the whole C++ community on me. That's good. And I think that even with TensorFlow and TensorFlow.js, I think there could be some things like making it a lot faster and lighter using WebAssembly, but don't quote me on this because I haven't tried, so maybe that's totally wrong. But I don't know even if I think it's going to be something more and more important, I don't know if it's something that you need to learn because JavaScript is still going to be here for a while. And I think that WebAssembly is going to unlock certain things, but I don't think that I would see the entire JavaScript community having to learn WebAssembly. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but I might be wrong. Maybe in 10 years I'll be watching that again and be like, I was wrong. But I think because what I like about WebAssembly is that you can work with it with different languages. You can do stuff with like C++ and WebAssembly and like Rust and WebAssembly. So I want to look into it. I wanted to look into WebAssembly and Arduino. What can I do with it? Like again, if I want to learn WebAssembly and I need to do it in a way that I'm excited about, so I might try with Arduino. That's also on my list.
Okay.
But other than that, I wouldn't really know at the moment. Maybe I'm out of touch. Maybe there's something new that I don't know about. Probably.
Okay, totally different question. I want to know about the worst interview that you had. Like the worst one. But it doesn't have to be like that you were your worst. Like I didn't know the questions, or I want to know like I don't know which interview was the worst for you.
I don't think I would. I don't think I ever had a bad interview experience. Well, not that. Maybe I just totally decided to forget it.
Lucky you.
I don't think I did. I can't think of any right now.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I have a boring interview.
No, not at all. Not at all. So, my other question, totally nothing to do with anything. You have all the budget in the world. You have an amazing idea. You want to build your startup. Who would you contract? Who's on your team?
Like people?
Yes.
Or
who would you pick to be like your coworker?
How many people can I hire? Everybody. How many people do I have to pick?
I don't know. Let's say like your top 3, 5.
But if I don't say my current team, they're gonna hate me.
No, forget it. We can edit this. We're going to leave this C++ thing, and we can edit this.
I hope they're not watching now then.
But like people that you admire, maybe?
Yeah, but it's a very... there's so many ways because it depends on the startup. It depends on the skills that I need.
I think you're overthinking this.
Myself here.
Okay, we can say like your whole current team plus a few people that you admire. I want to know like who do you look up to?
This kind of question is so hard. So everybody I ever worked with, plus I would love to work. I would love to work with Suze Hinton. I think we have similar interests, and I think I could learn a lot from her. I would love to work with Ruth John as well. It would depend what I want to work on as well, but there's so many people because now it's like
you're suffering right now. It's like I see your face. You're about to. Okay. We can switch the question.
What about me? I just don't think right now.
I want to see if we have any questions in the chat. So, there's one that's asking if you have any resources on web accessibility. Do you have anything on that?
I know people who are doing. So the main person that comes to mind is Marcy Sutton. I know that she has a course on front-end masters, I believe. And there's other people, but that's the thing with coming up with names on the spot. I know his first name, but I don't know his last name, so that's not gonna be useful.
John. Something.
Like Adrian, but I forgot his last name. I don't think I even knew his last name, but damn it. I can only think about Marcy Sutton right now.
Okay, that works. I think that works.
The internet is gonna hate me. Like, what about me?
Okay, so we are getting more enemies. We have like the whole C++ community, your whole team, the web accessibility community.
Industry.
Okay, we're ending this right now. No.
Oh my god.
Okay. So I want to go back. You said that like things we should be looking at would be WebAssembly. Do you have any resources on that, like documentation? But do you have anything other? If you don't, that's that's okay.
I don't. I know that there's some official documentations, but sometimes I struggle with official documentation.
Yes.
Again, I know somebody who knows a lot, but I only know his first name. So
that's John. John something too.
Last names. I'm very not helpful. But what I do when I try to find resources is that I look on GitHub. I go through GitHub search and I type what I'm looking for, so WebAssembly. And sometimes I use, you know how some people keep these like awesome repos, like awesome PD or awesome creative coding. I think there is one for awesome WebAssembly because I think I looked at it, and that's full of resources that people have curated. So every time that I want to learn something, I search through GitHub. It's a lot. I mean, I find it better than searching Google sometimes. Same with web accessibility. I think there is a GitHub repo for awesome accessibility resources. I find that super useful. So thanks for people.
Yeah, and we can do a bit of searching there, and then post some stuff for. I don't remember who asked for this, but we'll get you the info and the two Johns that we don't remember. We're going to post them too.
We can search for names and send you the links after.
Yeah. So, okay, I think I don't have any other questions, and I don't see anything in the chat. So, the one thing that I'd like to ask you is about. I think you built for the emotive like the helmet. you built something from scratch that was with JavaScript to be able to interact with that. What was like the hardest thing around that? Because you had to dig into, was it C++?
Yes,
The one that you just killed, yes. What was the hardest?
Maybe that's why I killed it. I was like, fuck that. Yeah.
What was it really hard? What was the hardest thing around that? How was it?
I think the hardest part was that I think I had been a dev for like 6 months only, so I knew like nothing. I definitely didn't know C++. So the hardest part is that I didn't really know Node.js, and I didn't know what a Node add-on was. And I read through the C++ like SDK, and I was like, okay, I mean, C++ is very different from JavaScript, right? So I was like, what is this symbol there, and what is this? So the hardest part was to try to navigate that. Like everything was new. And for a while I gave up on it. Like I remember I worked on it in chunks. That's why it took me 3 years to build that thing, because I started and then I couldn't figure it out. And then, a few months later, you kind of use the knowledge that you gain as you work. And still I had not worked with C++, but I had learned to jump into a code base I didn't know and learn. And I think the way you learn that stuff, you learn to learn, right? So then I learned to understand a language I didn't know, being like, okay, so I think this does this. And then at some point I had some of the functionality working, but then the rest wasn't, and I gave up for a while as well. And at some point, I think I looked back into it and I realized that I had forgotten one line. One line code was wrong, and when I kind of I did it, I was like, that was it, like all this time. But then it was awesome, because it's like, and that's the thing, is that I still don't know C++ very well. The code for that library is not good, but it does what I needed to do. And I have not looked back. But it works. I'm not going to touch it. But I think that was a super interesting thing to work on. And I think that's what has unlocked what I'm doing now as well. It's this whole thing of like, maybe for a while it won't work, but give it some time, take a step back and then look back again, and you will get there. Because I think that I knew that it was possible. What I wanted to do was just wrap C++ into a Node.js thing, and I knew that it was possible. I just didn't know C++ enough to build it faster. But that's super interesting. It's scary to think that you want to build your own framework or library, but when you do it, you learn a lot of stuff, and all of a sudden it becomes something that's not that scary anymore. So that's a fun thing as well.
Great. Okay, we're in time. I think like you gave us tons of messages, like do something that you're passionate about. So when someone comes and criticizes you, it's like, fuck it, I love it anyway. So whatever. So that's great. Knowing that like you, when you go off stage and you suffer the same things that all of us suffer, it's like everyone suffers around this, and like build your own achievement list. That is a great message too. And working on things that might scare you, you can eventually start and then put a pause on that, learn some other stuff, and get back. I think like those are our like main messages of today. Thank you. I can't be like, I repeated this so many times, but thank you so much for this time.
It was fun.
Thank
you. It was
you.
The most
yes,
fun I've in a while, because I'm stuck here. So
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much. That's the thing around coronavirus. Like everyone is in the same thing. So I can ping. Like I was literally going to ping Bill Gates to have an interview with him, because like he's at his home doing the same thing that we're doing. Like watching Netflix and coding something. So I think that, I mean, this is it's super shitty, but it gives us the opportunity to connect, and like we connected, and this is awesome. Like I'm in Argentina and you're I'm in Amsterdam, so it's great, and it's great for us people here in Argentina to be able to talk with you and learn from you, learn from your experiences, and we don't have to bring you to one of our conferences. So that's awesome as well. Thank you so much, and I think we don't have too many other questions right now in the chat. So yeah, I think we're finished. I don't know if you have any final words. C++ is not dying.
So don't hate me, internet. But yeah, no, thank you so much. It was really fun, and I hope that it was helpful.
Yeah, it was. Thank you so much. Bye, streaming. Follow us on the Fridays. Next Friday, I can't say who is coming, but it's going to be awesome. And pulls the thing here to subscribe. It's not going to be here, but click somewhere around here and follow us. And we're going to upload this to YouTube and our other social media accounts. So share with your friends. Thank you so much, and be safe.